Hello and welcome to another video from the Tradelands Nation. This is our annual World Report, as we have effectively capped off the year 2023 in Tradelands, so we are going to take a quick look back at how the economy has performed over the past 12 months. We start with a look at our stock indexes. As of the closing bell on December 31st, the M&G index closed at 23,661. This means the index gained 983 points in its final month, following the release of a new ironclad, which had a significant uptick in value for the mining industry. However, despite this final performance, the mining industry saw a loss of more than a quarter of its value over the course of the year. That's almost 5,000 points from where we started. One of the main reasons is that there are few changes to the output for miners, and updates to the game have made it significantly easier to do bulk mining for the few materials that do come from this profession. This seems to match with the overall trend seen on the prices for gemstones and common metals, which mostly saw price reductions throughout the year, presumably from sellers who are overstocked in inventory and could not sell their excess. For many years now, the mining industry has been viewed as one of the best professions in the game, but this year's overall performance of the industry is a serious question to that viewpoint. This will be something to watch going into 2024. On the other hand, the JSI index has closed at 18,348, up 21% from last year. Moreover, the gain in the index amounts to 3,849 points. This is in contrast to the mining index, which saw a decrease in its value, meaning these two professions are inching closer to parity in their ability to make money for players, effectively meaning that there is becoming less of a difference in how much you can make between timber felling and mining. This change is due to some significant improvements that were made to the game in regards to timber felling. The addition of new collectible resources, those are cedar, yew, and maple, as well as the greatly enhanced cosmetic options that are now available to ships, all of which primarily use wood, means that this profession is seeing a surge in demand. But there is no denying the gains that timber felling has made in 2023, and that momentum seems to be going into the new year as well. Finally, the earnings index, which measures the value of merchants' shops, closes at 43,957, which is the biggest loss of these three indexes, a quarter of its overall value, and down 10,857 points. Unlike the other two indexes, this is a slow and steady trend downward, and it's been going on all year. However, before reading too much into this, it's important to remember that the earnings index is currently just as profitable as the mining and timber felling industries combined. So it's normal to see a loss in value when the other professions are seeing upticks, because more money will be heading into those other sectors, not just this one. Moreover, the trend towards premium tokens over Robux to purchase in-game items has made it easier for players to obtain in-game items. So this trend is actually a sign that more wealth is becoming available to a wider group of players in the game, instead of being locked to just a handful of people who then control the prices. And outside of the close of the stock exchange for the year, the other event that closes out the year is the winter event. This year saw the release of new Cladifiers, new crate items, and a holiday event geared towards traders. The trading event follows a similar structure to the one that occurred 2 years ago, and in my view at least, it was one of the highlights of December. But in terms of economic highlights, there is no denying that the two most popular items were none other than the Nautilus blueprint and the new peppermint Gramophones. It's rare to see an item reach enough volume to make it onto our stock exchange the same month that the item is released, but these two items both did, and there's a good reason for that. The Nautilus blueprints became a popular option, generating more demand than supply pretty much from day one, meaning that sellers control the current price point. As of recording this video, sellers are hovering around 1 million doubloons per blueprint, meaning that this is likely to be following the ghost ship voucher prices if you need to gauge their worth. But as the rarity of this item begins to change, this will obviously change the cost of the item in the long term. And the other item was Gramophones. Prior to this release, it was common to see Gramophones going for as high as 1 million doubloons. And to that end, the new Gramophones drop with a 4% chance to obtain one, meaning they are significantly cheaper to obtain than they were in previous years. This is being reflected in the gramophone market, which is seeing the majority of these items selling for around 250,000 per gramophone. causing the entire market for gramophones to trend downward as a result. The index for gramophones prior to the release was around 800,000, and just 1 month later it is already down to 550,000. A loss of 40% of the index's value in just 1 month. And while Cladifiers did make a return this year, they didn't have the same level of market impact that they did last year, mainly due to the fact that the materials for these were released separately, titanium being the only exception to this rule. Contrast this to last year's release, where all of the Cladifiers had unique and unobtainable materials, making this the only way to make a ship that had that specific type of material. This actually makes those Cladifiers more valuable to the purchaser for use on his or her own ships, but less likely to drive value for long-term resellers, except for the titanium Cladifiers. And finally, the last big update of the year was to implement a method of viewing player houses across all servers. We visited all the houses available in-game and made a map of them. These showcase the various locations of shops that players created that were available to the public. This can, of course, change over time, so if your shop happened to be closed at the time that we visited and you'd like to have it added, let us know and we will try to update it. If there is interest in having us do this kind of thing in the future, also let us know. But maps aside, I do encourage players to explore all the places that you can visit, all of the shops, inns, and museums that players have created. And if you happen to come across a story that may impact the very future of Tradelands in the way that we have, be sure to let us know. But until that day, we must discuss 3 events that occurred in the month of December that will impact the future of Tradelands. And we start with an important battle that occurred for the control of the Onyx Rocks at Cannoneer's Quay. Despite their win last month, TCP was forced to temporarily withdraw from the island after a key naval victory allowed ABM to break up their supply run. But this was viewed as just a temporary setback, as the second invasion, building on the lessons learned from the first, was meant to give TCP a permanent garrison on the island. The battle plan involved landing 3 regiments to create a defense in depth on the island, with Captain Villain leading the forward element, Ice and Ryan in reserve, and a light ship providing suppressing fire against any attempt to retake the town on the northern half of the island. This was meant to put ABM in a difficult position, where they would effectively be starved out if they chose to resist, as resupply was considered precarious if not impossible. But in the opening battle, an important event would put all of TCP's plans in jeopardy. DevTurtle, seeing Null in the vanguard of the ABM line, broke from his formation and beelined it to intercept him. To understand why a veteran soldier like DevTurtle would risk putting everything in jeopardy, we have to understand the importance of honor to the pirate code. Looking back at the naval battle that caused this battle to even be required, it was DevTurtle commanding the Kirin that was expertly outmaneuvered by Null. After a long-range artillery duel, it was clear that DevTurtle had made a mistake, one which would require him to pull the primary ship from the other side of the battle formation to extricate him from the mistake he had made. This would inevitably lead to TCP losing this naval battle, especially after their primary ship was sunk. And now DevTurtle's reputation was in complete jeopardy. Seeing Null advance on him, he dashed out to meet him in a 1v1 combat to regain his honor. But alas, when it became clear that Null might actually beat DevTurtle here as well, the other TCP commanders decided to shoot Null in the back. If DevTurtle had been cut down, all would have been lost. So this duel to regain his honor will have to wait, it seems, as the battle continues to rage on. And the battle was a desperate one for ABM, charging over and over into prepared defenses. And unfortunately, ABM stood no chance. Cannoneer's Quay would fall. And this leads us into the next chapter of this story, known as the Odyssey of Al Bruno. Knowing full well that the fate of the Grand Isles may once again rest on his shoulders, he decided it was time to strike back at TCP. On his epic journey, his forces were intercepted by Whitecrest patrols, twice detaching components of his own force so that he might survive, and each were crushed by the overwhelming firepower of the Whitecrest Navy, but the sacrifice did allow Albruno to reach his base on Blackwind Cove. While a lesser man may have simply stopped here to lick his wounds and reminisce on past glory, Albruno and his loyal band of heroes, aware of the truth of TCP's misgivings, did what any altruistic Dark Knight would do in his position. His crew manned their ships and took their crusade to TCP itself. After an intense fight along the row of houses, TCP withdrew to the rocky cliffs on the far side of the island. And while it looked as though they might be able to hold out here, several key strikes broke the TCP flank, allowing the forces in blue to scale the front cliff face, causing TCP to fall apart in disarray. Albruno had won an important victory. But the full implication of Albruno's victory wouldn't come until later. But inevitably, there were two important outcomes that occurred. First, it is rumored that the loss to ABM caused a dramatic upheaval in the fighting doctrine of TCP. And while this does remain nothing more than a rumor, if it is true, we can certainly expect to see it reflected in the performance of TCP next month. But the second and arguably more important outcome was Albruno successfully prevented a secret meeting between TCP and an unnamed contact that was supposed to be taking place on Harrisburg. Their win on the island meant that this meeting would have to take place at sea, and as luck would have it, a few days later, in what would later be called the Zovats Incident, a Whitecrest deep sea recon patrol led by Captain Curtis would snap a photo of that very meeting. It was a photo of the flagship of the Pershovian admiral, but more importantly, atop the mast of his ship was none other than the flag of TCP. Albruno had successfully alerted the world that TCP was in fact working for elements of the Pershovian Navy. Moreover, it was unlikely that Pershovia was planning a peaceful return to the Grand Isles. More likely, it was to be a scorched earth campaign. And with proof in hand, Curtis is said to have disabled the Pershovian warship and returned to deliver the fateful news to King Zack himself. But unfortunately, there was more pressing matters in the world of Whitecrest. With the interference of the outside actors at Nassau's rebellion finally revealed, the true Nassau merchants that support the rebellion finally emerged on the battlefront. We know this because of a surprise invasion on Freeport. You see, a trader fleet will always exhibit three common traits. They know where the trade lanes are, they know how to park at a dock, and they always sell their cargo before doing any other task. And as instinct would have it, these traders rejected landing at the defensible beaches, drove instead into the docks, allowing each of their soldiers a chance to sell cargo that they might be carrying before they marched into war. Yes, it seems Nassau has finally arrived at their own rebellion. And although the battle did seem to have some intense fighting, such as the house-to-house fighting and of course all of the traders that were just chilling at the docks, Nassau performed exactly the way you would expect a group of highly experienced, highly profitable, and highly motivated players to perform in this battle. They were absolutely crushed. And now came the hardest decision, the counterattack. King Zack knew that Nassau was holding Whitecrest citizens under its occupation, and he wanted to avoid a crossfire where civilians were stuck in the middle. Before the battle, he sent in his most skilled mortar team, but instead of delivering their usual devastating barrage, King Zack asked them to deliver pamphlets that explained exactly how you could lock your house so that non-Nassau citizens would not be able to enter it when the invasion started, which would prevent the Pretenders from entering their houses in the upcoming liberation. The next morning, the Whitecrest fleet would wipe away the newly minted Nassau ships, cutting them down one by one, allowing their transports a chance to land on the island. The strategy that King Zack picked for the landing was again based on limiting Nassau casualties. He opted to land on the unpopulated eastern shore of the island and make their way systematically towards the docks on the other side. At the same time, the White Crest mortar team was raining down fire on the docks, leaving the Nassau Pretenders nowhere to run. And it worked like clockwork. White Crest would close the gap. Several rebels were in such a state of awe that they swam miles out to sea in order to surrender personally to that White Crest mortar team. Others reportedly begged to be let into some of the Nassau houses, which were now locked to them, many of which couldn't be unlocked during the battle. The combination of expert shooting and mortar fire meant that the Pretenders had no hope. They were now out of options. The remaining rebels moved their way to the docks. They commandeered a ship in a last desperate attempt to flee. And unfortunately, it did not work. And the battle was quickly over. And as expected, King Zack wasted no time in attempting to wipe away the memory of what had happened. He issued a decree that changes the name of Nassau. Presumably, Nassau would be known as Derwick to the citizens of Whitecrest. It is said that this information is still waiting on the Nar Illuminati mapmakers to approve it and have the change become available on all of the official maps, in the way that Helengard was changed back to Fort Werner. And it's still unclear if this renaming is for the town that is situated on Nassau, or if it's meant to change the name of the island itself. But while we wait for answers, one final important event occurred, in what may have been misinterpreted. By the orders of Dr. Didgeridoo, the nation of Nova Balreska sent Admiral Alicat a declaration of war on TCB. Historians will debate for centuries to come what exactly was meant here, whether or not Dr. Didgeridoo meant TCP instead of TCB, but since ABM recently engaged TCP, Admiral Alicat assumed he meant TCB, not TCP. And since the Chancellor had issued the order, that meant that action was expected to be taken, and so Admiral Alicat launched off the docks of Nova Balreska and made his way to Corsica. Here he encountered a surprise gaggle of fishing boats. His navy made quick work of the group, grounding one and capturing the rest. A clean win against a group that probably didn't even know why it was under attack. And with these captured ships, they now had a false flag in which they could land on Corsica. The Doke wakes up from his fitful rest, ready to begin his day of exploration and adventure. As his fellow birdwatchers wake up to join him, they discuss their plans to try and spot the rare Corsican grouse. Or perhaps instead, they say, will they spot a lonely white crest goose lost and so far from home? But wait, what is this that they spot in the distance? As Admiral Alicat looked on, perched atop the cliffs in the rear of the battle, his surprise attack on the fort was made an immediate success. TCB fought hard, but in the end, the overwhelming surprise attack on the fort was a lost cause. By the end of the day, all of TCB's leadership would be captured by Nova Balreska. And with this victory, as the Nova fleet returned home victorious, the power vacuum that followed led another group to take charge of Corsica, none other than TCP. And it was in this moment the truth is revealed. As the nations of the Grand Isles were looking away, TCP had consolidated their control over all the ports necessary to control the flow of trade throughout the Grand Isles. It would be the backbone from which they would launch their new empire. To stress just how ominous the situation had become, we went undercover into Blackwind Cove, and here we found the truth. Hidden in these paltry shacks is a wealth beyond imagination. In the first one we entered, it is filled to the brim with treasure and gold. If you consider that all of these shacks could be filled just like this one, and TCP controls it all, this would be enough wealth to create the greatest and most powerful fleet the world has ever seen. Blackwind wouldn't be just a cove, it would be the vault of a newborn empire that would canvas the entire world. The question we will now have to watch and wait for is, what will TCP do next? Will the nations of Tradelands come together and stop this new empire while there is still time? Will ABM's resistance find a way to stem the tide and save us all once more? Or will the world fracture and fall, forever ending the legacy of Tradelands and bringing a new era of the cursed lands from this point forward? Time will tell, but until then we end this month's broadcast and we issue a prayer to the Nar Illuminati to protect us all in this new and uncertain future.